Of this talk, indicators, metrics, and evaluations. Oh my. So that's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I ask it to, in all seriousness, how many people here have struggled with how to measure and evaluate and communicate the impacts of creative placemaking? I know I have, and I'm supposed to be the leader in this field. So, there's probably some selection bias because that's the theme of the conference. You're here to learn about this work. But there's a good number of people here struggling with this topic. And you're in good company. Since Anne Marcuson and I co-authored the white paper in 2010 for the Mayor's Institute on City Design for the National Endowment for the Arts, the NEA and ArtPlace have invested in combination over $61.5 million in creative placemaking initiatives all across the country. But with those new resources, there's also increased pressure to demonstrate return on investment. And part of this is about case making. Both the NEA and ArtPlace have been pretty transparent that in terms of creative placemaking as cultural policy, one of the objectives is trying to attract non-traditional arts funders to invest in this work. This is a slide from December 2010, a presentation that Joe Courtwright from a research consultant for ArtPlace put together. It was linked from their website, not anymore, but it used to be. And I just include it because you can see in the discussion of their vibrancy indicators, just how much of the frame was put around these issues of case making. So both the NEA and ArtPlace have been putting a lot of effort into trying to figure out how to meet these needs, most prominently by investing in the development and the testing of indicator systems. The National Endowment for the Arts calls theirs arts and livability indicators, whereas ArtPlace uses the term vibrancy indicators. And they are both really works in progress. I think both organizations would be very comfortable saying that this is not the only technique they're considering using and that they've been trying to be responsive to feedback. And to their credit, they have actually been pretty forthcoming about sharing their thinking and their design as it evolves. And it's opened up sparked some lively debate, especially in the blogosphere. If you haven't read them already, I strongly encourage you to read both Ian David Moss and Anne Marcuson's blog entries on the Create Equity blog, where they offer some really provocative, constructive criticism on this indicator approach. They make some great points. Ian David Moss, particularly, that we need to do a better job of connecting the dots, of specifying how we expect a particular creative placemaking project to influence change. What are those levers that we theorize will happen? And Anne Marcuson making a really impassioned plea not to do a one-size-fits-all indicator approach, but to do more project-specific evaluations and making some great criticisms about the weaknesses of different metrics and data sources. For instance, when you're talking about creative industry employment, entertainment workers are included. So there are lots of people employed in sports and media industries. And so, there are some issues that are coming to the fold with these efforts, and they're very much still working out the growing pains. But when I look at both this kind of conversation and the murmurings, I do a lot of public speaking around the country and consulting, and there's this undercurrent that I think we should just be really clear about. A lot of the concern around indicators, it boils down to tussles over values. So one of the characteristics of creative placemaking that I like to emphasize is that it's a big tent fuzzy concept. The term is subjective. Creative placemaking, you can actually infuse that with your own interests and values. There are 8 definitions in operation by different practitioners and funders currently. I mean, there are probably more than that, but the last time I tried to really count, there are 8. And this has been a strength, as it's coalescing into a movement that's attracted unusual suspects into the fold, the big tent concept. But it's also a weakness in that it opens up creative placemaking to criticism, that it's too vague. But particularly related to this issue of evaluation, when national funders put forth indicators, there's a lot of anxiety because suddenly it's not so fuzzy, it's becoming concrete, and there's concern that that people doing this work are supposed to try to hit these marks. Now, if you talk to the funders, they'll say, oh no, that's not what we're doing. We want the grantees to put forth what they want to do, or this isn't definitional. But this is a lot of what the anxiety and concern boils down to. So practitioners can also be concerned about being on the hook to have to move the needle, right? What is realistic expectation for a 1-year project grant? Maybe it's a modest grant. So, how do we balance the sort of larger national level efforts to develop comprehensive ways to look at this work of creative placemaking with the realities on the ground when you might be doing something that's really small scale and maybe going to have a modest impact? So actually, Liz Crane from Art Place is in attendance today, and Sunil Iyengar and Jason Schupak from the NEA will be here tomorrow. And they're in a much better position to give you updates directly on how their thinking has evolved and other planned approaches. So I'm going to let them speak for themselves. But a takeaway here is that whether it's these large-scale national efforts or more project-specific, this stuff is pretty important. So why does evaluation matter? Why do we feel the need to do this work? Does anyone want to share? Why should we evaluate? And I think we have a roving microphone, and if you could just say your name and where you're from, that would be great. I see there's a lady right here in a black sweater, maybe. To do it better. Yeah, no, a lot of this is about trying to improve internal practice. So if you're evaluating your own work, not just what happened, but why it happened, right? How? So that you can try to improve your practices and understand. And it's not just on an individual basis, but this is also about field building, right? We can learn a lot from looking across different strategies, across different types of communities, what was effective, where, and why. So we're not always trying to reinvent the wheel. Anyone else? Other reasons? I see someone here. To make sure you're making a difference. What are the outcomes of your work? Just is it working? Anyone else?
I think. Oops. Go ahead.
Wherever that was.
I'm sort of blinded, so you'll have to help me.
To build support from other sectors.
Yes, case making. Okay, so that is a big one. And I think that this pressure to demonstrate return on investment, it's not unique to creative placemaking. In terms of philanthropy and actually in government across the board, there is more of an onus to substantiate return on investment. It's no longer enough to say, I'm a nonprofit, we have a great mission, we're fiscally responsible, we're not in debt. Look, our board is diverse, we've got good leaders, trust us, we're doing good stuff. Give us money. It's now about socially responsible investing and project-related investments, and really the whole paradigm has shifted. So you have to be able to articulate what are the impacts. And this is in government too. The NEA, like all federal agencies, is under increased scrutiny from the Office of Management and Budget under the Obama administration to really be transparent about how taxpayer dollars are being spent and what are the outcomes of that work. So case making, improving internal practice and field building, Another one that's maybe not intuitive right away is the ability to adjust strategy. So this might not be so specific to evaluation, but when you talk about indicator systems in general, maybe it's important to gather information about where you work, where you're trying to do this, and over time. So you might be tracking data that you're not expecting to move the needle on, but it may inform your tactics and your strategy. So for instance, maybe there's a new hotspot of crime activity on a certain corner, and you find that out from working with the police department. Perhaps then that would be a good location to put an innovative public art project. You can just be doing data collection and gathering efforts to try to improve your own practice, somewhat divorced from evaluation. And in terms of philanthropists and funders, they want to know how to use their resources widely. What types of strategies work in certain types of communities? They have their own specific agendas, so they want to know, what gets them the most bang for their buck and learn. So they want to be able to adjust strategies as well. So that's some of the why we evaluate. But let's talk about the how. This appears to be challenging work. You're all here trying to learn. What are some of the reasons why we think this is tough?
I often count on my fingers and add things up and put lists and make tables, and artists often don't.
This is a great point. So do the people driving creative placemaking initiatives or organizations, do they have the technical expertise to do evaluations? And if not, do they have the resources to bring on a consultant or an outside expert to help them craft an evaluation system and gather the data and write it up? So, you put it very colloquially, but that's really the rub. Yes?
Another part of the reason evaluation is tough is that our most fundamental definitions are not consistent. What constitutes success? What constitutes better? Is it economics? Is it long-term gain? Is it short-term bang?
Sing it. This is great. So that conceptualization, all right? So just trying to wrap your hands around what creative placemaking is. What is success? What does success look like? I try to say, how would you know it if you tripped over it? But then it's really dependent on who you ask. And creative placemaking, one of its great strengths is that it's about involving diverse constituencies. It's about cross-sector partnerships. But when you have all those different players in the mix, it's hard to find agreement. And even more so when you get down into the really specifics of measurement and evaluation, because it's easier to say, oh yeah, everybody's about increasing livability or about increasing vibrancy. Woohoo, we can get, but what does that actually mean? And if we're going to go back and look at key performance indicators, what should those be? Then it's a little bit harder to get buy-in. It's really beautiful when you can find that sweet spot of shared value, but these are dynamic, messy, moving parts. So exactly. Anyone else?
Over here. So for anyone who's done any kind of evaluation, when we're looking at vibrancy measures, especially outside of administrative measures, we all quickly find out that we cannot find consistent measures over time in the areas of well-being and those kinds of things that we want to measure with creative placemaking. So it forces us all into administrative measures in order to make it reliable and consistent. So those are still developing. We don't have social measures that are reliable.
I like this adage, which I came across recently. Measure what you value, don't value what you measure. And sometimes, you choose to measure what you can, because it's the only thing you have, but is it relevant? Is it meaningful? And is it accurate? Okay, so sometimes you have a data source that might make sense, but the sample is bad, or there's such a time lag that it's not really meaningful anymore. You have such a small sample size that you can't get down to a level of geography that really makes sense for your project. Here's another one, which is a nice takeaway. Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts.
And these are the issues I was also going to bring us. this isn't the field of arts, and so much of what arts does is intangible and emotional and civic, and none of us here in the room want us to lose sight of the fact that we're creating something that's very that the economic impact, which is only one of the things we're trying to evaluate, is sort of the tail of the larger thing we're trying to do. And this captures it very well. So that, most of the people involved in creative placemaking, at least the arts-oriented aspects of creative placemaking, and you're right, there are lots of different definitions now, are primarily interested in the transformation of place and perception and aesthetic connection and building civic social capital and all those sort of things. So those are very hard to measure and very hard to agree with. Some people even to define.
So what Barnaby was talking about, again, boils down to some of these issues over getting buy-in on what constitutes success, right? So, he's talking about the intrinsic benefits of arts and culture, but other stakeholders care about the economic benefits or placemaking, and it can be hard to just even figure out what it is that you should be choosing to measure. So in terms of why evaluation is tough, another one that we didn't speak to so much is this issue of bias. So a lot of people talked about, okay, we need to do this for case making, for advocacy purposes, right? But if you're coming at this from the perspective of let's prove it, then you don't have that objectivity to say, okay, this is an intellectual exploration, and what are we going to discover? And I'm a neutral party. And also, your work can be discounted if it seems to be just a puff piece and everything is, rose-colored. So that's a challenge. I think we got to causality. We didn't actually talk so much about this. So you may have a good indicator system or an evaluation, but there's still the question of how do you know that the change that you're seeing is because of your creative placemaking initiative. These happen in places with lots of dynamic, moving parts, whether it's a rural community or an inner city neighborhood. There are other factors. And so it's really tough to say, we were responsible. So that's another challenge we have to face. I think we hit on most of these, so I'm going to move ahead. And the takeaway here is that it's important, it's challenging, but I don't want you to feel that it's hopeless. There are some resources and examples that I'm going to share with you that hopefully can provide some inspiration and just roadmaps for how other projects have handled these challenges and some tools that you may be able to take home to your own communities. So actually, 3 of them are from my own work, and let's look at the How Art Space Matters reports. Now, this is an example of a nonprofit arts organization, ArtSpace, a developer, one of the leading developers of ArtSpace across the country, bringing in an outside expert to conduct a very in-depth impact evaluation of 5 artists' live, work, and mixed-use spaces in 4 cities. We had the Riverside Artist Lofts in Reno, Nevada, the Toshiro Kaplan in Seattle, the Northern Warehouse and the Tilsner Artists Cooperative in St. Paul, and the Traffic Zone Center for Visual Arts in Minneapolis. And what we were interested in doing is figuring out how these developments impacted the artists and arts organizations occupying the space, the tenants, as well as the benefits to the surrounding neighborhood and region. And to get at some of these challenges of causality, what we ended up doing is adopting a mixed methods approach. So we combined qualitative techniques. I interviewed lots of people in the community, ranging from the artists and building managers in the building to long-term neighborhood residents and activists to small business owners to elected officials to known critics of the project. We also conducted a survey of arts tenants and looked at the income records for those tenants because it's a low-income housing tax credit project that the artists were required to submit income verification every year, and so we were able to see what the change was. And we also looked at trends in socioeconomic data, historic trends, looking both before and after the artist space development. And we looked at a range of indicators, again, that were relevant, that seemed to make sense for the project. We incorporated neighborhood measures and then looked at the larger parent regions of the county and city to be able to try to see, okay, is there something special happening in this area, or do we see this change everywhere and it's just more of a regional trend? So in combining all of these approaches, we were able to not speak directly to causality, but paint the picture of neighborhood change. And we would find out what the interviewees said. Okay, we think such and such happened in the neighborhood. Then we'd look at the secondary data, the socioeconomic data, and say, oh, that's corroborated. We see that trend too reflected in the numbers. And then talking to a range of stakeholders, from known critics to elected officials to the artists. Okay, what do you see as the artist space's role? And what are the other factors that you also see influencing this change? So we could paint the picture of neighborhood change and try to convey what the role of the artist space had been. So here are some. Oh, I wanted to just say that one of our techniques, hedonic modeling of property valuation, I know that's a mouthful, actually let us speak a little bit more directly to this causality. It is a statistical analysis approach that actually looks at how a particular intervention, in this case, the artist space development, impacts surrounding area property values. And how you do it is you take lots and lots of sales data and from decades. So by looking at all of that length of time, you're able to sort of tease out, control the ups and downs in the housing market. And then each of these data observations also has characteristics about the property. Okay, how many bathrooms? Does it have a garage? Is it close to the central business district or other amenities? And so you're able to estimate what the impact in space and time is for the artist space intervention. So that was one technique that we were able to get at that really had more of these spatial and temporal controls. So here are some of the benefits that we were able to substantiate from doing this work in terms of benefits to individual artists, co-location, the synergies. They were more able to access networking and share resources and skills, modest boosts to income. And in terms of neighborhood benefits, we saw evidence that a lot of community members credited these projects with anchoring arts districts and providing new venues for expanded arts access for the public, and directly transforming historic eyesores into beacons of community pride, and that had impacts for the fiscal, for tax purposes as well. And then, in addition to that, just boost to property values and reductions in crime. So these are the sorts of impacts that we were able to get at by looking at this wide range of metrics. Another thing that's interesting about this is because we looked at 5 different projects in different neighborhoods, and these projects varied in terms of structure and size, we also could start to get at the why. Someone said in terms of improving internal practice, how do you know why and how is it effective? So their differences affected outcomes, and we could start to tease out, okay, what are the factors associated with success? So we looked at both outcomes and more of a process evaluation. And Colin Hamilton from ArtSpace is here. I don't know if you want to share anything just in terms of how this evaluation has opened up opportunities for ArtSpace or influenced your internal practice. He's actually near the wall.
Sure. Well, it's been huge for us. I said this to you the other day, Anne. I think we reference this study in every presentation, every grant report, every pitch that we make. And it's very you did a really substantive work. We, almost immediately, as you know, took it and narrowed it down into what was a more usable case for us, and we've condensed it even further. So it is kind of odd how over time, really major, detailed, methodologically grounded work becomes a little bit glib.
Soundbite.
Yeah. But that's worked for us. And I think, I would say it's kind of curious in this context. I don't feel like we really have a whole lot of challenge making the case for the impact of our work. That feels so much easier than it was 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when it sounded crazy to be doing this kind of work. Now there's a very receptive audience, and to be able to put this kind of information on the table, it's almost never challenged, I have to say, in our experience, and people are kind of ready to believe it.
So they ask for it, but once they have it...
As you were talking, I was thinking there's kind of a difference between methodology and believability. And it seems like there's a part of the world that's always going to want to dig into methodology and argue about it, but that's a kind of small portion of the world. In terms of believability, it seems, again, that the context that we're working in has changed so dramatically that the willingness of people, city leaders in particular, to believe this kind of information. Even I think if we had done the same report and put it out 10 years ago, they wouldn't have read it, they wouldn't have believed it. You put it out now, and there's a willingness to kind of take it at face value. Not entirely, but a lot more so than a little while back.
So I really like the point that Colin's making about the importance of thinking about the end user, the intended end user for an evaluation or an impact study. Who would be your audience, and what do they already believe, and what prejudices might you have to work against? What types of information would be effective? Are they going to discount it unless it has charts and figures and stats? Would they be more moved by storytelling and qualitative case studies? So thinking about what's effective, and you guys had both. You have these 2 hefty 50-plus page reports, and then boil it down to a little brochure or 1 or 2 slides. So thinking about all of those different ways to communicate your impact once you do the assessment. So another example that I'd like to share with you is an indicator system that I worked on called Track at Hennepin. But unlike the Vibrancy and arts and livability indicators that Art Place and the NEA are working on, this is very much tailored to a specific project and a specific location. So Minneapolis engaged in a 1-year creative placemaking effort, a planning effort called Plan at Hennepin, centered on a downtown corridor, which had lots of different arts and cultural assets, but there was a sense that they could be more effectively linked, and that there were unrealized opportunities, and that they could do a better job linking to transportation and do some innovative cultural programming and progressive public art. So there was a really robust community engagement process in which they came up with a vision plan for this area, what would become called the Hennepin Cultural District. And I was brought on concurrently, this is a little hard to read, but concurrently to try to develop an indicator system to allow that the organizers could use over time for a few reasons, so that they could track their progress and communicate it to different stakeholders to try to increase support and bring new supporters into the fold, so that they could also do diagnostics, like we were saying, shift their strategy if something changed. And this was pretty difficult to do because, we were talking about the challenges of conceptualization. How do you wrap your hands around what a creative placemaking project was? And we were flying the plane as we were making it, right? So instead of saying, okay, well, here are outcomes, the outcomes were changing with more and more stakeholder involvement, and I'd have to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, well, now such and such is a priority. And it took a lot of work. I did a series of focus groups with different types of community constituents and looked at these evolving plan drafts. But ultimately, what we came up with were a range of sort of indicator thematic goals and headings that closely tied to the plan objectives. And under each one, a series of concrete measures that were relevant, the data was fairly reliable, that made sense. In addition, we looked at, even though it wasn't overtly stated in the plan, but we looked at ways in which arts and cultural enterprises and artists might be being strengthened through this work, and whether the effort was associated with general positive economic momentum, and metrics to monitor for unintended consequences, such as gentrification-led displacement. So, all of those were efforts to try to be responsive and adjust strategy and look and see if some of the inputs for this work, such as, the creative arts and cultural organizations and artists, were reaping some of the benefits. So we came up with a system, and it was a difficult process. It was iterative, but I think actually trying to do this hand in glove ended up making the plan stronger because it pushed people to say, okay, well, what do we really, really want? And it challenged their thinking. Now, the focus has been on implementation, and I think this is one of the challenges of trying to do evaluation, that it is resource intensive, and the focus often is first on doing the program, doing the work. That's where the priority should be before you try to evaluate it. So they have not yet gone back and updated the year one benchmark. So I'm waiting to see, once they get their management structure in place, will there be renewed efforts, whether the roadmap that I laid out in terms of, okay, such and such data source and such contact will be enough for them to implement it with, relatively little technical training and expertise. So we'll see. But I wanted to share this with you because it's an example of an indicator system, but that's very much not a one-size-fits-all. It's really tailored to a specific place. And these metrics, these data measures, are not nationally available data sources. A lot of them are specific to Minneapolis. I did a lot of phone calls and digging to different city agencies or regional agencies to try to see what are they already collecting that might be useful and relevant. Would they be willing to share with us? And met with a lot of openness and collaboration. So those are I wanted to just talk about the Creative Placemaking white paper in relation to evaluation and case making. So we profiled 14 different case studies, ranging from large cities to tiny towns, and a range of strategies, not just artists housing and arts animating vacant spaces, but arts and workforce development and healthcare and transportation. And what we did when we profiled all of these, it was just kind of quick and dirty. We did phone interviews, and we tried to tell the story of how these projects came about, who was involved, how did they measure their own success. And cutting across all of these different projects, we were able to distill key ingredients for success and challenges. So this was sort of a quick and dirty first pass, but it's important because it's often pointed to as sort of the standout example. People curious about how to do this work or questioning what it is or what the benefits are, look to those case studies as a roadmap. So there's so much potential to do these more comparative, short qualitative case studies and do this distilling of lessons learned, both for case making and for field building. So I just wanted to highlight that as a really important source of potential for this work. So these are definitely not the only approaches, and I'm excited today that we're going to hear from other practitioners. Laura Zabel speaking to how she used media analysis to look at changes in community perceptions for Springboard for Irrigate in St. Paul. Sarah Lee is going to talk about the work-in-progress efforts to evaluate the community building impacts of the Levitt Pavilions, which is a network for free outdoor music stages all across the country. And Marty Pottinger, I was particularly impressed with her intuitive and low-tech approach to evaluating her work using creative projects to transform municipal bureaucracies. And then you're all going to be able to participate in some research, well, not those of you who are staying, on Saturday, looking at, it's keying in what your psychological state is at different points in the evening. So you'll get some more bearings on what this is all about and how to do it, and inspiration for what you might be able to take home to your own community. And if you don't know about it already, I strongly encourage you to check out the Americans for the Arts Animating Democracy page. They have just a slew of resources around evaluation. They have this focus on social impact of the arts, but there's a close overlap between that and creative placemaking. And they break it down in terms of conceptualization in much more nuance and detail than I was able to get into here today. And they're templates for how you could go about doing this yourself, DIY evaluation. So this is a valuable resource that you should all check out at your leisure. I also want to just encourage you to reach out to colleges and universities in your home community. Grad students can be a great resource, and oftentimes universities have some mandate to do community research projects or community outreach. So there may be some relatively low-cost or free resources and technical expertise that you can partner with to try to do this work. So I was just hoping that a few people could share their own experiences in relation to evaluation, or if you have specific questions about any of the models that I shared with you, I'd be happy to answer them.
My name is Jared Holmes, and I live and work in a very small community. And I've been struggling with the question of how to evaluate this sort of creative placemaking work in the context of a small town. I spent many years in cities, and my initial sort of impulse was to try to recreate the way that people think about measuring this stuff in cities, around density and things like that. But what I've noticed is that in Vermont, where I live, it seems like what people look for is something different. It's more about making connections across kind of diffuse communities. Mm-hmm. So you have one river valley and you have another river valley, and people know each other and interact, but it's very informal. And so it's occurring to me that that there might be a need to think about it sort of fundamentally differently, but I'm having trouble kind of working out
how?
Yeah, just how to do that.
No, so again, the whole strengths and weaknesses of creative placemaking being this fuzzy concept, it can hit a whole range of potential outcomes, from physical to economic to social, and the intrinsic benefits of arts and culture, all rooted around transformations of place, whether that be a neighborhood to a small town to a region. But because it can be so many different things, you really have to try to look at your own work. What are the changes that you're trying to influence, and reach out to the people that you'd like to partner with and find out what their priorities are. So it's about that conceptualization. What does success look like and for whom? Reaching agreement, and then how are you going to get there? How do you expect to actually influence that change? And so it's tough work, but I think you're absolutely right to say we can't just transpose urban models into my small town, that those metrics don't necessarily make any sense. Anyone else want to share their own experience with evaluation? Yes, is that Marty?
My name's Helen Lang. I'm the director of the Steel Yard here in Providence.
Oh, good.
Welcome to Providence.
Thank you.
I just have a question, actually. And in the beginning, you said that there were about 8 different definitions for creative placemaking. And I was wondering what those are.
Okay, well, I can show some of them. If I can figure out how to make this
Because I think
work.
it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I guess I'm looking for a little more clarity around it, and particularly in how it's defined and
Definitely.
Et cetera.
I'd be happy to. Well, this is the definition that Anne Marcuson and I developed in the white paper. Creative placemaking is a process in which partners from the public, private, nonprofit, and community sectors, so cross-sector partners, strategically shape the physical and social character of a place, of a neighborhood, town, tribe, city, or region around arts and cultural activities. So that's a mouthful, but it basically boils down to 3 main elements. strategic action by cross-sector partners, a place-based orientation, and a core of arts and cultural activities. And our definition also speaks to outcomes. Creative placemaking animates public and private space. It rejuvenates structures and streetscapes, improves local business vitality and public safety, and brings diverse people together to celebrate, inspire, and be inspired. So in our initial framing, we included these economic impacts, the intrinsic benefits of arts and culture, as well as more physical and social impacts of arts and culture. So again, it can be a lot of things. And if you have a creative placemaking effort, you wouldn't necessarily hit every single one of these. It's about really what makes sense for your particular context and your particular strategy and the partners involved. And in terms of other definitions, let me share a few of them. This is what Art Place has put forth, a means of investing in arts and culture at the heart of a portfolio of integrated strategies that can drive vibrancy and diversity so powerful that it transforms communities. So if you compare the two, I've actually, I have a writers group, and I got some feedback from an artist, and she's like, I really like Art Place's definition. It's so much more inspirational, and yours is so dry and boring. And you can see this language is inspirational, vibrancy and powerful, and arts transforming communities. But it's also pretty subjective. What does that really mean? Whereas ours is much more specified and fleshed out and a little dry. And then Kresge Foundation is definitely coming into the fold as another leading creative placemaking funder. Now they're a little bit newer to the game, so have less notoriety, but they really place an emphasis on creative placemaking as a means of expanding opportunity for low-income communities and people of color. And then just one of the definitions from practitioners that I like a lot is from Artscape in Canada, which is kind of the counterpart to Art Space in the US, but their definition is an evolving field of practice that intentionally leverages the power of arts, culture, and creativity to serve a community's interest while driving a broader agenda for change, growth, and transformation in a way that also builds character and quality of place. So I like that definition too. Is Laura Zabel in the audience? Do you want to share a springboard for the arts definition? Because yours is one of the 8 that I've counted.
Hi. Springboard's definition of placemaking is that it is the act of people coming together to change overlooked or undervalued places. So we've really been intentional about focusing our work and our definition on the people who are already in a place and their own agency and ability to change or affect or have a voice in the place in which they are.
Okay, so lots of different interpretations, lots of different approaches. Yes.
Oh, sorry. I have the microphone. I apologize. I too am from Vermont, and one of the things that I have noticed is that there is a temporal issue also that has not yet been addressed, which is people want what other people have done successfully to happen tomorrow in their community, and they set up the means to do that, and they have these wonderful expectations about outcomes, but it takes, places like Bellows Falls didn't happen overnight. It took 15 or 16 years for Bellows Falls to transform itself from what it was to what it is. And I would love to talk to anybody, really, about are there interim indicators that we should be paying attention to that we can see have led in past examples to a successful outcome, but that don't look like the successful outcome while you're on that journey to the successful outcome. What are those indicators, and how do we codify them, and how do we share them and work towards them so that we know, yeah, we're on the right track, or no, boy, we're really not.
Well, you bring up 2 really interesting points. So this first one is this issue of time horizons. So yes, for a particular project, how long is it expected to unfold, and manage being realistic about those expectations. Now, some projects might be really more short-term. So there might be considered in creative placemaking ephemeral art intervention, like a candy chain before I die wall that goes up. And if that's the one thing, that's kind of in and out. It's done. It has some impacts. Maybe it's a series of these ephemeral interventions that happen over a year, and then you have a longer time frame. Or you can have more of a long-term strategy, whether it's a big bricks and mortar capital project like artist space development, or a cultural district planning process for your community. So just trying to think about what the time frame is that you expect these outcomes to come online. And then it's difficult because the resources aren't always paired accordingly. So the NEA is restricted to give one-year grants. So they try to address this by saying we'd like to invest in things that are part of a larger strategy and comprehensive approach so that we can help play this catalytic role, but we're not going to be able to give you sustained support year in, year out. Art Place, my sense is that they have a little bit more flexibility. But yeah, how do you temper expectations so that it's not unrealistically high for a one-year project expecting to have all of these transformations by the conclusion? And then tracking these indicators long term. And what you said is codify. Now, I don't know that we're going to crack the code by agreeing on the indicators, because one-size-fits-all approaches aren't necessarily appropriate. We have the small town in Vermont, and we have New York City. So it's about sharing information and resources. And that's one of the points that I'd just like to close, is that we have this opportunity for field building to share these approaches so that we're not all trying to continually reinvent the wheel. And so this conference is really a blessing in that we can all get together and intensively talk shop for 2 days, and then hopefully there'll be ways to extend that learning through the online resources. But in conclusion, I just want to recap that this is important work. You're not alone, but it's challenging. Lots of people are struggling with it, but there's hope. There are some interesting examples and resources, and the more that we can take advantage of these opportunities to share and have openness and, not these gotcha moments, but to really be constructive, critical learners from each other and in dialogue with national leaders funding this work, the better. A few things just from my soapbox, try not to discount the importance of qualitative case studies and storytelling. That might be more appropriate for your intended audience if you're looking at case making or distilling best practices from a range of approaches. Be thoughtful about how you evaluate. Measure what you value, count what counts, and sometimes you may need outside help. And that's okay to admit. You might have to set aside some resources to do it. Keeping this tension between research and advocacy in the balance, being mindful of the ways in which that might bias your efforts. And overarchingly, really considering this challenge of success on whose terms, and trying to come up with your different constituencies and different partners with what your outcomes will be. And it's going to change. This is dynamic, messy work. But just staying mindful that it's I guess it's a group process. So thank you so much, and I'll be around throughout the conference. I just wanted to share my website with you guys. It's metrosarts.com. There's links to all the studies that I mentioned, as well as if you'd like to join the email mailing list, or if you follow social media. My Twitter handle is metrosarts, @metrosarts, and there's other ones as well. So I'll be around for the whole conference. Please come up to me, ask for my card, give me pushback, tell me what you thought, and thank you so much.